science enthusiasts. My name is Jason Zakowski. I'm a high school chemistry teacher and a science communicator, but I'm also the dog dad of Bunsen and Beaker, the science dogs on social media. If you love science and you love pets, you've come to the right place. Put on your lab coat, put on your safety glasses, and hold on to your tail. This is the Science Podcast. Hello, everybody. We hope you're happy and healthy out there. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Science Podcast. On all forms of social media, we've been pushing out more science content, and I want to thank everybody who's been interacting with it. A directive of what Bunsen and Beaker content is, at its heart, is science education. And it's tough. That's a tough sell when it's a lot easier to just post adorable photos of Bunsen and Beaker. Don't worry, the cute content isn't going away, but we've just re-emphasized the science communication. I hope everybody's enjoying it. On the Science Podcast this week, we're going to take a look at a study that found some disappointing facts about being in space for too long. It's kind of what we already knew, but it's a little bit more detailed and maybe worse than we thought. I'm not going to space anytime soon, so it's not something the average person has to worry about, but it's interesting. Anyway, in pet science, we've got a fun story that looks at the science behind why pets rub their butt on the ground. I saw Beaker doing it the other day, and I was like, what are you doing? She looked at me sheepishly, and I was like, why? Is her butt itchy? Let's take a look at what the science says about why pets do that. That's kind of weird. Our expert guest is Dr. Laci Brock. I love this guest. She is so knowledgeable about outer space, but specifically these mysterious giant planets called brown dwarfs. She's such a great speaker, and she mixes art with what she does with science. I hope you enjoy the interview. At the start of every episode, there's a really bad joke. This one, I think, is the worst dad joke I've ever found. And you know what? I'm not ashamed to say it. Hey, dogs, what do astronauts do to prepare for space travel? They take their vitamins. Okay, on with the show. Because there's no time like science time. This week in science news, let's talk about the dangers of space travel. I forget where the quote comes from, but space travel is hard. Somebody said that. It's hard, and it's really hard on the human body. Before, astronauts would go to space for an hour, 2 hours, a couple days, maybe a week or two. But now we have astronauts that have been in space for months at a time, away from Earth's gravity well, and in an environment that our bodies are so not accustomed to deal with. So a new study published in June from Scientific Reports looks at the catastrophic bone loss that astronauts suffer. So let's break down the study. They took 17 astronauts, 14 men and 3 women, and the average age of those astronauts were in their late 40s. They needed to have spent a long time in space, so the average amount of time that these astronauts did spend in space was between 4 and 7 months. They used some advanced bone density scanning techniques. It's a bit beyond my understanding. They're called HRPQCT. It takes a very, very detailed 3D structure of your bone down to 61 microns. Now we're talking about microscopic measurements here. If you want to think about what 61 micron size is, like if you want to think about a scan that is that detailed, that is thinner than the thickness of one human hair. So at this level, they can really get into what the bone structure was before and what the bone structure was after spaceflight. The bones that they specifically looked at were the tibia in the lower leg and then the radius in the lower arm. Now, of course, images were taken before spaceflight and after spaceflight, but then they looked at 6 months after spaceflight and a year after returning to Earth. And the idea was to check if the bone density loss returned to these astronauts. Now, one of the shocking conclusions was comparing bone density before to bone density after spaceflight. After 6 months, the astronauts had only regained about 50% of their pre-bone flight strength. Now, the astronauts in the study that spent the most time in space, the bone density scans showed permanent bone loss, meaning that after the year of return to normal Earth gravity, their tibulas showed permanent bone density loss, which was equivalent, so say the scientists, to about 10 years of aging. Now, the good thing is that the lower arm scans showed almost no bone loss, but that kind of makes sense, I guess, because you're not putting weight on your arms unless you're one of those TikTok people that are walking on their hands for views and likes. But the legs are weight bearing, right? So if you're in space, you're not constantly putting weight on those bones. So less bone density is required. How do we get around this? We don't want permanent damage to our astronauts that spend time in space. And there's 3 choices, really. The first one is to make sure astronauts are not in space for long enough to suffer this permanent bone loss to their tibulas or their weight-bearing bones. The second is to really increase the amount of weight training that astronauts do when they're in outer space. You've probably seen videos of astronauts working out, and they have to work out so hard in outer space to maintain their muscle and their bone strength. And what they're doing just isn't enough. Now, the third thing is untapped to science is some kind of like combination of nutrition and supplements and perhaps even hormones that astronauts on really, really long space flights could take to maintain their bone strength. Remember, if we are going to send people to Mars, that is a 2-year trip, minimum. The bone loss that those astronauts would face with our current understanding would be staggering. So I know for some of us, our dream is to go to outer space, perhaps like space tourism. You go up for a little bit and you come back down. You'll be okay. Astronauts that don't spend a long time in space don't show a loss of these microscopic tissues called trabecula, because when those trabecula are gone, you can't rebuild them. You can strengthen the remaining ones. So the whole idea is not to lose bone mass and to strengthen what you've got. It's a problem for future us as we look to transport humans among planets within our solar system. That's science news for this week. Okay, this week in pet science, we're going to take a look at why your pet might be scratching its butt on the floor. You've probably seen dogs do that. Cats do it too. What is the possible reason and the science behind this weird and disgusting behavior? Okay, this story comes to us from Science News, and they actually interviewed a bunch of different veterinarians to get their opinion on why dogs and cats scoot their butt along the floor. The first reason why they do that, I think, is the most silly, but also the most logical. And it's because it's the easiest way to scratch their butt. Their butts are in a position that very few dogs can reach. Cats are a little bit more bendy than dogs, so they might be able to get at their butt. But the average dog, there's no way it could get at its butt. Bunsen doesn't bend. He's built like a brick. And if his butt was itchy, he can't get at it. So he either uses humans as his butt scratcher, or I've seen him like out in the wilderness scratch his butt up against a tree like a freaking bear. Now, if the butt scooch is like this one and done type of behavior, you can laugh and say, oh, your butt's itchy, and get on with life. But if the butt scooting becomes something that is happening all of the time, there could be a medical issue. Not to get disgusting, and I've never had a dog that's had an issue with this, or a cat, is that it could be because their anal sacs are irritated. Anal sacs are these little tiny glands on either side of a cat or dog's anal opening. It's actually interesting. Veterinarians and animal scientists don't really understand why dogs have those anal glands. We're not really sure as to why they have these things. There are some ideas like the smelly fluids that the glands release make it easier for them to go poop, or give them more scent on their poop to mark their territory, or maybe to give some unknown chemical out to the world when it's time to get jiggy and mate. In some types of dogs, and I know we've had people comment on social media, those anal sacs can get infected or blocked. It's less common in cats, but it can still happen. If the butt scooting is occurring all the time, it's a good indication that that's the first thing you should check. Some pet owners have been taught by vets how to express the anal glands if there's a blockage, but you can always bring your cat or your dog into the vet if it is blocked. We're just talking about gross stuff today. So if anal blockages and anal glands is a little sketchy for you, the other culprit for butt scooching is parasites. Now, just like humans, when a parasite's inside you, I'm not speaking from experience, mind you, but when a parasite's inside you, you can't feel them inside your intestines. But as the parasites work their way out of your body, the wiggling and jiggling near the anus may be felt by the dog, gross, or the cat. So itchiness, scratchiness, irritation, of course, may make their butt itchy, so scooting along the ground may relieve some of that feeling. Obviously, if you suspect your pet has parasites, get them a diagnosis and get them some deworming treatment. Lastly, it could just be allergies. Beaker is allergic to something in the summer. We found this out. She got itchy and rashes last summer. If we didn't watch her during some points of the summer, she would lick herself and she would get a hot spot. And the same thing's happening now. We had her on special like anti-allergen food because maybe it was food related. But during the winter, all of her scratchiness and itchiness went away. So it's something in the environment that's making her itchy. And who knows, there could be something in your food. There could be something in the dog's food or the environment that's making their butt itchy. So those are just some ideas backed by our friendly vets giving their advice about why dogs and cats may scooch their butt along the floor. That's Pet Science for this week. Hello, everybody. The Science Podcast will always be free to download and listen to. You'll never have to worry about paying for it. But we have some amazing ways that you can help us out with running the show. The first one is to think about becoming a patron on Patreon. And we call our patrons now the Paw Pack. There's a whole bunch of awesome perks and different tiers of support. We also have a very detailed and excellent merch store. And if you're listening to this in time, we have pre-orders of the Bunsen 2.0 stuffy that was just adorable. You can check it out. There's also the Beaker stuffy on our store and a whole bunch of comfy clothes. The third thing you can do is give us a good rating. Rate the podcast wherever you're listening to this. We'd love to get a great rating from you. Okay, back to the show. It's time for Ask an Expert on the Science Podcast, and I have planetary scientist and artist, Dr. Laci Brock with me today. How are you doing today, Doc?
Hello, I am great. How are you?
I am good. I'm actually really excited to talk to you. One, because you have such a cool mix of science and art. And two, you play video games.
I do. Probably too much.
I was talking on a space last week, and the conversation kind of went to video games, and I was mentioning that I have Elden Ring, and then another person said, "Oh my goodness, I'm about ready to kick my husband out of the house because of Elden Ring." I can see why. It's kind of addicting. It's kind of a fun game.
I've seen so many memes about it. I'm not playing it personally, but I've seen so many memes, and it's hilarious.
So, Doc, I introduced you as a planetary scientist and artist. We'll probably get to the art a little later, but would you mind breaking down what your education is? What's your to be a planetary scientist and have a doctorate? What's going on there?
Sure. So I went to undergrad at Purdue University, and planetary sciences was not a major that existed yet. I actually started in atmospheric science because I wanted to study something like severe weather here on Earth, even though I had a passion for space since childhood. Mm-hmm. And somewhere along my undergraduate career, I think it was sophomore year, one of my professors in an elective mentioned we had planetary science faculty, and he was new and I should talk to him. And his name was Dr. Jay Malash. And I spoke with him and I told him that I was interested in, space and atmospheric science. And I learned that was planetary science. And so I started working with Jay and sort of crafted my own undergraduate major. And it ended up being officially interdisciplinary physics, but it was planetary sciences. And after I graduated, they actually got the major for that. But planetary sciences sort of combines geology, physics, atmospheric sciences, and you study planets in the solar system or asteroids,
Oh, wow.
moons, or exoplanets or brown dwarfs, which is what I study.
Oh, wow. So, Doc, when you were little, were you a space like nut? Were you like me, just couldn't read enough books about space, or did something kind of like grab you later on when you were a teenager or something?
Actually, very similar to you, it sounds like. I have a cliche space nerd since I was a child story.
Okay.
I've always loved space, and like I mentioned earlier, I've also really liked the weather.
Mm-hmm.
I I grew up in rural Indiana, and I was raised by a single dad with
Hmm.
the help of my grandparents, and we didn't have a lot of money. I spent a lot of time playing outside. We went camping. I like to run around. We had a small farm, and I think me being outside is how I really first connected with my love of space. Maybe staring up at the sky or watching clouds roll in during a storm. And
Mm-hmm.
so in second grade is when I got all those books and what is lightning? What is thunder? What are the planets? And I've just always loved it since I was little.
Were you the little precocious kid that had everything memorized and you would just like start butt into the adult conversations to tell your science facts to people?
Oh, yeah. I also memorized roller coaster statistics for some reason, but I was definitely that kid that was like, I'm going to tell you all these things I like.
Oh man, I wouldn't want to know roller coaster statistics. Like you're at Six Flags or something, and you're like, did you know that in 1982 there was a fatality on some little kid that memorizes everything.
Yeah, I had everything memorized. And I did that with the planets
Oh, cool.
and the weather. Yeah, I was a nerd, a little nerd. And I really liked geology. I really liked volcanoes. I actually thought I might like grow up to study volcanoes, but I really loved physical sciences.
Oh, a volcanologist. I think that's what they're called, right?
Yeah, yeah. I thought I might do that.
I get
think
that confused with people who know a lot about like Spock.
yeah.
Different type of thing.
Live long and prosper. I definitely I loved science a lot, and I couldn't decide what I wanted to do. And it's almost like I wanted to do space and I wanted to do weather. And I think planetary sciences is an excellent field because it combines all of those different
Mhm.
aspects that I loved as a child.
Oh, that's so cool. So in your doctorate, you have to do like a big project / research, right? What did you focus on?
Yeah, so eventually after undergrad, I went to grad school.
Hmm.
Um, I actually didn't get into a PhD program the first time that I applied. So I got into a master's program and then I went on to get into a PhD program.
Hmm.
And when I got into my PhD program, I really wanted to study clouds on other worlds. And brown dwarfs, I learned about them during undergrad and I really wanted to study them. And I was lucky to be able to start on a project with brown dwarfs. And I study the clouds that form in their atmospheres and model those clouds.
What? Really? That is okay.
I know, it's
That's
so
so cool.
cool.
I can't believe that's something that you study. I've never talked to a scientist yet on the podcast that has even mentioned brown dwarfs. So this is really exciting. Laci, could you break down for us what the heck a brown dwarf is? Because
Yeah,
people who are listening are like, "What is she? What is that? Is that?"
I know. And the name is terrible. Brown dwarfs aren't brown.
Mm.
Brown is not really a color. So a brown dwarf is a substellar object. And that just means it's not as massive as a star. They are sort of the in-betweens, I like to call them, because they have properties of both stars and planets. So they're not massive enough to fuse hydrogen like a star would, and they're not as hot as stars, so their atmospheres are actually cool enough for clouds to form in them, like a planet like Jupiter. But they're more massive than Jupiter. You can think of them between about 13 times the mass of Jupiter and about
Whoa.
80 times the mass of Jupiter.
Whoa, they're huge.
Yeah, they're all about the same size as Jupiter in radius, but they're a lot more massive.
Like dense, like they got more stuff inside them?
Um,
Or am I getting that wrong?
yeah. Well,
I don't
that's
know.
it's
I'm not a planetary scientist. I'm just a schmo.
yeah, it's more mass in. So I guess I don't know. The volume's different, but we don't really understand the inside of giant planets like Jupiter very well, so it's hard to say.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's hard to say. Gotcha.
But they can't fuse hydrogen, so they contract throughout their lifetimes, because in a star you're fusing hydrogen into helium, and you sort of have that, you have the heat and the pressure pushing out. And so a star like our sun, it doesn't shrink in size for the most part. It stays roughly constant. But brown dwarfs, well, they're kind of like failed stars. So they don't have enough mass to fuse hydrogen, so they are a little larger when they form, and then they slowly contract and cool through their whole lifetimes. And the clouds that form in their atmospheres are they're really interesting. The materials, I don't want to spoil it because there's a fun fact I want to share later.
Oh yeah, don't spoil your fact.
I'm not going to spoil my fact,
okay.
but clouds can form in their atmospheres, and to understand these objects, we need to understand the clouds. And I model those clouds and compare it to telescope data.
So, like, you get data from doing a little looky-loo at these brown dwarfs, and then try to figure out how the clouds roll about on the planet. Is that kind of it?
Yeah, exactly.
Huh.
Brown dwarfs, we actually predicted them in the 60s that, well, there's got to be something in between, planets like Jupiter and the lowest mass stars, red dwarfs. There's got to be something there. What happens if a star forms, but it's just not enough to be a star? And about 30 years later, we finally detected them.
Oh, wow.
In the 90s.
Is this something that, like, when the web starts beaming data back, are you excited to see brown dwarf stuff?
Yes, I am so excited because brown dwarfs are brightest in the infrared. So James Webb is going to be perfect to study brown dwarfs. And we can get currently, like, you could study brown dwarfs with Hubble. Yeah. You can study brown dwarfs with Keck in Hawaii on Mauna Kea. Yep. But James Webb will give us longer wavelength data. So we'll be able to see more of the spectrum of a brown dwarf. And certain signatures in the spectra can tell us about the clouds that are present. So it's almost right now we're working with a piece of the puzzle, but James Webb will give us more puzzle pieces, and we'll be able to learn a lot more.
Figuring Out Family isn't your ordinary podcast. It's a completely new experience that helps you make your family the best it can be by giving you the deep insights to help your family thrive. You'll learn how to help your family have more productive conversations and manage life's disappointments too. You'll feel inspired by the special guests that are experts in their field of family relationships. Get valuable tips for dealing with difficult family members, repair broken relationships, improving your parenting skills, and keeping your children happy and healthy. Check it out now.
I love that analogy. You're building like a Wile E. Coyote jigsaw puzzle, and all you have right now is like his left foot. But with the data, you're seeing more of the coyote.
Yeah. So it's really exciting because we will be able to get information that a lot of information that we maybe haven't had before necessarily. And it's very exciting.
Can I ask a couple follow-up questions? Because
of course.
I have written down like 10. We won't have time for all of them. Because they're so massive, do they suck in like a bunch of moons? Like do we know if they have moons around them, or did the moons get crashed into the planet due to gravity? Like, I don't know.
They could have moons around them. They often form, what I study is binary brown dwarfs, because we can get the mass from binary brown dwarfs, and mass tells us a lot about the object in question, and we can use it as a sort of an empirical constraint to learn more about the atmosphere. The more physical properties we can gather, the more we can constrain our models and understand these objects better.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a good example. It's not quite a brown dwarf, but the line is blurry. So have you heard of the TRAPPIST-1 exoplanet?
Yeah, TRAPPIST-1, you betcha. Yeah.
Yeah, so the star of that system is right on the line of low mass star and brown dwarf. And we see, the 7 rocky planets around it. So if that star was cooler, it would be a brown dwarf. And that system is a good example because with a star that's low mass like that, and you get all of those rocky planets, it really put the question out there like, okay, well, are there planets around brown dwarfs? Is there enough
planets,
material?
Not moons. Oh, okay.
Yeah, and maybe it's really detecting exomoons is difficult because of the resolution that you need. But I mean, we see moons around Jupiter, we see moons around the giant planets in our solar system. So there probably are moons around brown dwarfs, I would imagine, but it's not something that we can quite see yet. But brown dwarfs, they could definitely have planets. Brown dwarfs sometimes form around other stars, like a solar type star. You can have 2 brown dwarfs that orbit like a regular star. That's possible.
Wow. Does that mess the gravity up of the solar system? Like, would it be a wild place to live? Like, everything would be bananas.
Not really.
Not really? Okay.
Because it could, if the star and the brown dwarf were really close, they would do some crazy things. Like hot Jupiters. You've heard of hot Jupiters before. Yeah. They're so close to their stars that the stars are consuming them, and it'll almost distort the hot Jupiter to be more of an egg shape because of the gravitational interactions.
Oh my goodness, that's wild.
So if a brown dwarf was really close to a star, that would happen too. But brown dwarfs tend to be really, what we've found so far, they're usually really far away from the star. Like, I'm trying to think of an example. I think the object that I'm studying right now is 50 astronomical units away from the star. So it's really, really far away. So they wouldn't have any interaction. But if it was, where a hot Jupiter was, where they're zooming around that star, then yeah, there could definitely be some kind of crazy gravity action going on.
Well, I'm glad I'm talking to you, because I just picture like these jumbo Jupiters, and maybe they're too close to an Earth-like planet, and they'll just like slingshot the planet kind of, but it's like weirdly, but they are just so far away from everything, it wouldn't be as big a deal, I guess. That's what you're saying.
There, for some, I'm not sure, but there aren't a lot of brown dwarfs around solar type stars. The ones we've detected are far away, but there's not a lot. There are not a lot of brown dwarfs around main sequence stars, I don't think. So it's an interesting area, and there's a lot of ongoing research.
So aside from your study of brown dwarfs in science and planetary stuff, you do art, like you do paintings and stuff like that. Could you talk a little bit about the art that you do?
Yes, I love to paint so much. I've been painting my whole life on and off as a hobby, never really sharing it with anyone, just sort of painting for fun or for a gift. Because, growing up, being a poor student, I would just have to paint people things.
Oh,
but
that's amazing, though. I'd love that gift.
Yeah, so I never really shared my art. But a few years ago during grad school, I reconnected with art. I mean, I got very busy during undergrad. I worked 3 jobs, and I was a full-time student, and it was just hard to keep up on painting. But at some point during grad school, I felt as if something was missing, and I wanted to, paint again and consistently paint. it's just something that I sort of unintentionally pushed away, and I had a lot of bad advice along the way where people said you couldn't be a scientist and an artist. And unfortunately, as a first generation student, I believed people that had more experience than me, and I thought, oh, well, I must not be able to do science and art. But I realized at some point that I didn't care what people said, and I wanted to do it anyways.
Good for you.
Yeah, and I'm glad I didn't lose that part of myself. But when I started to reconnect with my art, I wanted to teach myself to paint in a different medium. I painted in acrylics most of my life, but I started to teach myself how to do spray paint art and watercolors, oils, and then digital art, I think is the newest one. But most of my work is either space or nature related.
Yeah, I do background on guests, and I definitely I trolled through all of your stuff. I was absolutely amazed.
Thank you.
I think your painting of Jupiter, I'll put that when we're talking on Twitter. I'm going to put that in the nest. I just love Jupiter as a planet. It's so cool.
Yes, Jupiter, best planet.
Best planet.
I have painted Jupiter probably 7 times. I just keep painting it in all the different mediums that I know how to paint in. I think I can paint in 6 or 7 mediums now, and I just keep painting Jupiter in all of them. I actually have a giant canvas on my wall right now with the great red spot ready to paint.
Really cool.
Yeah, I haven't done it yet. It'll take forever, but I love Jupiter.
So obviously you do these paintings, you do your art as a creative outlet. Do you sell your art? Do you use it for income, or again, is it just for a creative outlet for yourself?
Greetings from Film the World Podcast. I'm your host, Trick O'Moore. I would like to extend an invitation for y'all to come check out our podcast. We take a look at book reviews, one a week, movies, music, pop culture, and UAP. Our hottest download is Dreamland from George Knapp's Bob Lazar saga. Thanks for checking out Film the World Podcast.
I have sold a couple watercolor paintings, but I don't actively sell my art. Mm-hmm. I wanted to start selling my art, but it is very overwhelming, I would say, to, create a website or use Etsy. Set your prices for a painting. That is a challenge that I still have not figured that part out yet. Mm-hmm. I will eventually sell my art, but I didn't want to stress myself out. Mostly I was finishing my PhD and
I
busy,
thought, yeah.
I was like, I'm going to sell art. Wait, this is a lot of work. I knew it was a lot of work, but when I sat down and I really wanted to do a good job, I sat down and I started, figuring out the whole venture. And I thought, no, I need to focus finishing my PhD right now, and then I'll come back to it. And I do want to sell it in the future, mm-hmm. but I also don't want to do commissions because I want to paint what I like, and I'm self-taught, so I don't know what I do when I paint. I sort of just go, and it sort of just happens. And so if somebody wanted me to paint something very specific within my purview of what I paint, I don't know if it would look like what my last painting looked like. I don't have a particular style, and I don't use one technique. I sort of just go, and it happens.
Well, it's excellent. I love it. Yeah, and I guess you don't want to bite off more than you could chew. You put something out there, and then the next thing you know, people are, I want 10 Jupiters, and you're like,
I know,
oh my goodness.
I don't remember how I painted that. I don't think I can redo this. That's something. I also love the art, and I don't want it to become a source of stress to where it's like a job. And so I'd like to sell art, but I think, I'll probably start with prints because I actually don't have a lot of paintings. Most of them are hanging around my house.
Cool.
And I don't want to get rid of them because I like them. So it's something that I will start thinking about more in the coming months.
That is very similar to my creative outlet. I make cosplay props. So
Oh, that's awesome. Do you use the foam and
yeah, foam
oh,
I've got 3D printers.
I'm
So
jealous. That's
yeah,
awesome.
but I do to do commissions. But if the commission is stressing me out, it's my building these things I love doing, and I feel that sometimes I'm like, I'm not really loving this when I'm under the gun to build this very specific thing. So I feel you on that front too. And then plus all the stuff I built, I have a hard time getting rid of because
Yeah.
they're all my babies. I'm like, I don't want to sell my my Stormbreaker Thor thing. So
Yeah, I completely understand. When I started painting in oils, I think I probably have 10 oil paintings. That's it. And I, a lot of them were my firsts. Like, this is my first planet in oils, or this is the first time I painted a galaxy in oils. And I don't want to get rid of them. I don't think.
I hear ya. Well, thanks for talking about your art. Again,
No
we'll have
problem.
when if you're wondering, of course, we'll have the doc's accounts in the show notes, so you can click to take a look. And in the ad for this, there will be some of your artwork when we advertise the podcast when it comes out.
Yay! I hope people like it.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. It's great. The other question I have for you is you're on TikTok, and you have, I believe, 2 TikTok channels, one for science communication and the other for gaming.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about your foray into TikTok?
Mostly I cause shenanigans on TikTok.
Okay. We love shenanigans here.
I have 2 accounts. On my main TikTok account, I create planetary science and space art content. It's mostly science videos, and then there's a sprinkle of art. I refuse to separate science and art. That is my whole thing, especially after living this lie, essentially, where I was told I couldn't be a scientist and an artist. And so I refuse to separate them. And I know that social media and the algorithms and people like to follow a person who creates content in one area. Oh, this is the science person that talks about space. Or, oh, this is the painter that paints abstract things.
Yep.
But I refuse to separate them. And I also game a lot, and so sometimes I would post about gaming, but I separated the gaming out into another account because I did think it was too much to put in one place, and it was less interconnected than the science and art. So I made the second TikTok account, and I just post gaming clips to it.
I love that. I love that you've rekindled and refound like this part of you that just, feeds your soul. That's so cool. And you shouldn't try and separate the stuff that makes you you. That's cool.
Yeah, I really don't want to separate them, and I'm not going to.
Yeah.
I do. My goal is to film myself painting. I'm trying to get more comfortable with it since it's always been private art, I guess. I never really shared it with anyone throughout my life, and I never filmed myself. I notice when I film myself painting, I get nervous and I start painting faster and I start like over analyzing what I'm doing. And I'm trying to work through that because I'd like to film myself painting, say Jupiter, and then do a voiceover where I talk about the science behind what I'm painting.
Yeah. Yeah. My cousin Mandy, she has got a massive TikTok account. She does face paintings.
Oh, awesome. Oh, that's fun.
Yeah. So that's what she does. That and a bunch of other TikTok shenanigans. But yeah, so she has like pictures of kids' faces, like draw like boards of them, and she does a design and does a little overview, and it's very popular with people who like that content. So
yeah, that's awesome.
Since I have somebody that plays video games, and it's been a long time since a guest could relate to me with how much, I do love video games. What games are you playing lately, or what's a game that you do like to play?
I play a lot of Apex Legends.
Okay.
That's what my whole gaming account is. It's just Apex clips. Yes,
For people who don't know, this is a first-person shooter that you have different classes of people that have different abilities. Am I on the right track?
Yeah, exactly. It's
Okay.
a first-person shooter. It's a battle royale game. So one person or one team, one squad, standing at the end to win. I like a lot of different games, but I noticed that I sort of get sucked into one main game and I play it all the time. It was Overwatch for a couple years, and then when Apex came out, I started playing Apex, and I sort of mostly play Apex, but I also I have a Nintendo Switch as well. My fiance and I, we have all the games because he's a gamer too.
Okay, well there you go.
Yeah, and I like to play Stardew Valley. That's my chill
Stardew
game.
Valley, Stardew Valley.
I
Yes.
love the game. I also love the story behind Stardew Valley. That one person created it. The art and the game. It's just really amazing.
Mhm.
What other games do I like? I like Stellaris,
Oh yeah, I've heard of that one. Haven't played it.
Borderlands 2.
Yeah, Borderlands is great.
I downloaded a game a couple of weeks ago called The Universe Sim, and it's like you basically created the universe, and it's like a Sims type game, but you can colonize other planets. It's like Space Sims.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Kind of. That was pretty cool. I don't know if that's new or not, but I played that for a few hours. It was really fun.
I played Overwatch when it first came out, and nobody knew how to play it, right?
Oh yeah.
I'm terrible. I'm so bad at those those first person shooter games. So much and so that I would pick the characters that didn't have to have a gun. So I picked the big guy with the shield.
Reinhardt.
That was the only thing, and I was so good because you press the button and his big shield comes up to protect your dudes, right?
Oh, a tank. Tanks are so hard to play.
Yeah, so that was the only character I would do, and I would just like put my shield up and protect everybody, and everybody's like, "Good job," and I'm like, "Yes, this is the game for me." I don't need to use weapons. He's got a big hammer. I'm like, this is literally me in life, big life, like in real life. Like if I had to fight, I would get a shield and a hammer, and I would be that guy. So, but then
hold mouse, press W, win.
Yeah, exactly. But then I got busy, stopped playing for 6 months, and came back, and everybody could murder me, and I had to stop playing. So I wasn't good anymore.
I was a trash can Reinhardt. Very, very bad. I played a lot of Widowmaker. My aim is I have pretty good aim.
Oh, good for you. Yeah.
So yeah, I like to play Apex because I have good aim, and then my movement is okay, but I don't know how many hours I have. Actually, I do. I have 2,000 hours in Apex.
You destroy. You know what? Because I teach high school science. You destroy all the kids that probably think they're hot stuff, which would be hilarious for me.
Yeah, it's some scientist just pooping on 14-year-old kids. Yeah, my aim is really good. I just mute voice chat so I don't have to talk to anybody, and I usually play with friends.
Aww.
And I've met a lot of people through gaming. I hang out on Twitch a lot, and it's really nice. I've been gaming my whole life. It's fun seeing how gaming has changed, and now you can get online and hang out and watch people play games. That didn't exist when I was little. It's just really fun.
No, that's a new development, and it was really funny. People thought that was weird, right? They're like, "You're watching people play video games?
Yeah, you get paid to play games? Like, what is this?"
I'm like, what is professional sports then? Aren't we just watching people play games too? Like, anyways.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm so happy we got to talk about games. I am a huge fan of Stardew Valley. That is my relaxing go-to game when I've had a stressful day teaching. So
yeah, I take my Nintendo Switch on trips too, and I'll play on the plane.
That's awesome. Just farm some turnips and milk your cows while you're on some plane flight.
I know, so nice.
Well, thanks for chatting with us about your TikTok accounts. We'll have links in the show notes for those. We're at the point where we have some standard questions on the podcast, and the first one is for a super fact, which you were careful not to spoil. Some guests,
I almost spoiled it.
Some guests do that; they spoil their super fact in the starting interview. Do you have a super fact you could share with us?
Yes. Okay. So earlier I talked about clouds on brown dwarfs.
Yes.
the clouds on brown dwarfs are made of gemstones.
What? No.
Oh, yeah. It's not like a solid gemstone cloud, but the atmospheres of many brown dwarfs are hotter with greater pressures than Jupiter. And so the atmospheric characteristics determine the types of clouds that will form and what material condenses to form these clouds. On Earth, we get clouds made of water, right?
Mm-hmm.
Water vapor condenses to form a cloud. But on brown dwarfs, the material that condenses is very different. It is made of iron, silicates, corundum, quartz.
What?
And so corundum is actually where rubies and sapphires come from. And some of the silicates are instatite or forsterite. And you may know that like peridot, the green gemstone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is so cool.
Now, it's like a vapor of this stuff?
Yeah, because it's so hot.
It's so hot.
You get iron vapor, silicate vapor, and then that will condense to form a cloud. So then, if you think about it, okay, well, if it rains or hails, it would be either solid or liquid material. So, rain liquid iron on your head
Oh my God.
or something.
That's hellish.
Yeah. Brown dwarfs
They're kind of metal, aren't
they're
they?
kind of metal. Yeah, I was going to say that. And then I was like, oh, well, will people think they're made of metal? I think they'll get it. Exactly. It's really interesting.
If you scooped up like a scoop of this vapor, would it just solidify? Like if you could scoop it up and not die, because obviously you'd die, and then you like froze it, would it be a hodgepodge of random stuff? Like, or is it like a cloud all one thing, like quartz vapor?
We're still learning a lot about the clouds on brown dwarfs, but we think that they're in layers. So,
wow.
Maybe there's a layer of the iron clouds, and then, a bit higher up in the atmosphere where it's a little bit cooler. Maybe that's the silicate cloud layer, and maybe towards the top there's more of a haze of salts or something. It depends on the individual brown dwarf's properties, but the models, thermochemical models, will predict like these are the types of materials that can condense in the atmospheres. And we see that in our solar system. Like Earth, it's water. Venus, it's sulfur dioxide. On Jupiter, it's ammonia. I always forget the names for the Jupiter clouds. There's different materials, but it depends on, Venus is hot, and so you're getting one type of cloud, and then Earth is cooler, and we get water clouds, and higher up or lower, sometimes there's more ice in the clouds.
Mm-hmm.
And so brown dwarfs is kind of similar, but instead of like different layers of water clouds, you've got iron clouds or ruby and sapphire clouds.
Whoa. I'm just trying to picture this. It's just filling me with wonder. Like it's
exotic clouds. And exoplanets have this too. Like sometimes in the media you'll see something that says clouds made of liquid glass, and it just sounds like very intense and clickbaity. And I think that most scientists don't get like super excited about it, but I still do because I'm a child at heart, and I'm like, oh, that's so awesome, a glass cloud.
I'm just like because these are so hot, it's so dangerous. You'd only be able to look at them from far away, but just.
Hello, this is Chris Sass, host of Insider's Guide to Energy podcast. If you haven't had a chance to listen to Insider's Guide to Energy and you're passionate about energy, want to know what's happening in the energy transition, or hear about new and emerging technology making a difference in energy, this is the place for you. We have a main show that comes out every week called Insider's Guide to Energy. We have Insider's Guide to Energy stories where we tell you about interesting people and jobs in the industry. Then we have a Student and Future Leaders program where we have a job board and content just for you. So if you want to find out more, subscribe now to Insider's Guide to Energy and follow us on YouTube. We look forward to bringing you the latest. See you soon.
Oh, man. Like
Well, they're actually not bright like a star, invisible light, or, ultraviolet. It's mostly bright in the infrared. So it actually would be very hard to see one.
Okay. I meant like if you could fly to one, like let's say you could fly to one, like you'd have to observe it from far away. You wouldn't be able to go near any of these clouds. Like it's not like you could fly a plane through them. You'd fry.
Oh no, you'd die for sure. But if you
Okay.
could, that would be cool.
Yeah, that's the kid in me. The kid in me is like the magic school bus. You can go anywhere, even to the clouds of a brown dwarf. So
I know. Yeah,
Miss
maybe
Frizzle
dip
needs to
to
get
the
on that.
top.
Yeah, Miss Frizzle needs to get on that.
Yeah, she does. That would be great.
That is a super fact. That is a mind-blowing super fact. I'm glad I'm sitting down and not driving. I might have had to pull over. So if you're listening to this on your commute, I hope we didn't cause an accident.
I know.
The other standard question is for a pet story, because this is the podcast. We mix amazing science with chat sometimes about animals. Do you have a pet story you could share from your life?
Yes, it was hard to decide because I had an iguana when I was younger and some other pets. But then I remembered in middle school, we had some type of fundraiser where students sold things. I don't know. I think it was sausages and cheese and gift boxes, one of those school
Rummage
things.
sale or something.
Yeah.
Right?
And you had to sell things if you wanted to, but there were prizes essentially for selling so many items. And I sold enough items to get a prize. And the prize was sticking your hand in this box and pulling out money.
Okay.
So for every, I think it was, I don't know how many items, I don't remember, but you gotta reach in and pull money out of this box blindfolded or whatever. And I sold enough to do it 3 times.
Okay.
And there were $1 bills, $5 bills, $10 bills, $100 bills.
How come I didn't get to do this in high school?
I don't know. I'm from Indiana, and I went to a small elementary school.
Where are they getting the money from? So
Yeah, I don't know, but of course it's probably all mostly $1 bills, but I was lucky that day. I reached in and I pulled out a $1 bill, and then I reached in and pulled out a $5 bill, and then I reached in and pulled out a $100 bill.
Oh my goodness.
And I took that money and I decided that I wanted to buy a parrot with that money. And we found a local breeder somewhere out in the country in Indiana, and I used that money to buy a Quaker parrot that I named Thunder.
Oh my goodness.
And he was my friend who I purchased with my weird fundraising money. And he was a green Quaker parrot.
Aw.
And we had some good times.
I love that story.
Yeah, people would ask me how I got him. And I'd have to I would explain that, well, I just pulled money out of this box and I purchased a parrot.
Yeah. I sold so much random stuff in grade 3.
I sold enough sausages to various adults in Indiana that I purchased this green exotic parrot.
This sounds like something that would do well on TikTok if you could somehow turn this into a story.
I know. I've always really liked birds, and my dad was so kind and let me get a parrot. He also let me have an iguana. I was not allowed to have a snake because he was afraid of them, but I really wanted a pet snake growing up too.
My son had a snake for many years. It was a giant albino python.
Ooh.
And I was terrified every night I went to sleep because I thought this may be the last night I'm alive. It's going to break out and kill us all. Because it's a reptile and they don't actually have the mammalian kind of love you part of its brain. So
I did have an iguana. I named him Dante after Dante's Peak, the bad science movie that I loved and still do love. And Dante was a pretty chill iguana. I brought him into show and tell in 6th grade when that was still a thing.
I think it still is a thing.
Really? Oh,
yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. I don't teach elementary. I teach like grade 11, 12s. But I'm sure I'm sure show and tell is still a thing.
Oh, that's good. This is a long time ago, but I remember wheeling in Dante in his aquarium into my class.
And you were probably the rock star because all the kids would lose their mind when they saw pets. Like that was the biggest thing.
Yeah. Dante was a great iguana.
Well, thanks for sharing your pet story. And it's kind of a segue into the last section of the podcast where we get to know a little bit more about our guest outside of what they do. And it's on the line of birds. Your love of birds. Could you talk to us about bird watching?
Yes, absolutely. I could go on about birds all day. I just told you about Thunder, my Quaker parrot growing up. I always loved birds, but I leveled up and became even more of a bird nerd during my grad school time. It was
okay.
It's a sad story, then it gets good.
Oh, okay.
It was my 2nd semester of grad school. I was in a master's program and I lived in Flagstaff, Arizona. And I got in a terrible car accident. I couldn't walk for 6 months and all I could do was stare out the window. And I was in Flagstaff. I'm originally from Indiana, and I saw all these hummingbird feeders at the grocery store, just everywhere. And so I bought one and I hung it outside the window. And the first hummingbird that came was a beautiful orange and copper hummingbird.
Aww.
And I'm from Indiana, like I said, and we did not have hummingbirds that were that color. They're all green with a red throat. And I was mesmerized by this bird, and I later learned it was a rufous hummingbird. That's also when I discovered the Stellar's jay, which is what I named my page after, Stellar Arts. Just sitting on the couch, not being able to go anywhere. I got really hooked on bird watching. I'd never actually done it before on purpose. You just see birds.
You're
but
like,
I
it's a
got
bird.
yeah, I got really interested in birds, probably because I was in a different area. And later I learned that west of the Rockies and farther west, there are different birds than there are in Indiana. And I learned that Arizona gets all these different hummingbirds. And I just started bird watching. I bought binoculars. I wanted to go find certain birds to put them on my list. And since that day, I have seen over 300 different species of birds. And I actually use a website called eBird, and I'm a citizen scientist. So I report the birds that I see on these checklists, and that data is used by ornithologists to track bird migration patterns, and it aids in conservation efforts. And so it's sort of like I get to be an amateur ornithologist.
Do you go on treks? Like, do you go out on hikes to look for birds, or are they just around the city? Or,
yeah,
or wherever you live, right?
Yeah, both. I will go out on a hike and just record what I see. I will also go specifically to see a rare bird. It's like Pokemon.
I was going to say it sounds like when a Pokemon Go was really popular and a Snorlax showed up, everybody would go running for the Snorlax.
Yeah. So on eBird, there will be rare bird alerts. And it's very interesting too. Like, oh, this bird is here a lot earlier than it's supposed to be. Tells us a lot about how the climate is changing. Or, whoa, this bird has never been here. It likes subtropical forests. Why is it here? And I will go, I don't do it all the time, but especially if there's a rare hummingbird, I will go seek that out because I love seeing different types of hummingbirds. But it's sort of like Pokemon. Your Pokedex is your life list. And the bonus part is that data is actually used for science and it's useful. And so it's a fun hobby. It's very relaxing to just go on a hike, and you can invest as much money or as little money as you want in it.
Because the next step is getting like the high powered like lenses to take photographs of the birds.
Yes, people have some crazy setups. I will go and just, I'm just here to see some hummingbirds. And there are people that have telephoto lenses that are like longer than my arm.
And as much as your car, probably.
Yeah, exactly. So people, this is crazy. Like after I got into birding, I learned about a big year, and people will spend an entire year and they'll travel the entire world seeing birds and just reporting. Wow. And it's like a game. Like how many species can you see in a year? And people do it competitively. Like I want to beat the record for the most species in a big year. And there's this whole like weird side of birding too. But
I think if you look at anything, there's a weird side to anything.
That's true. Yeah,
it's probably like one of the subreddit for something weird that you think is kind of normal. I'm sure.
Yeah, I learned a lot about it, but I'm a huge bird nerd. I'm not the best at photography, but I like it. It's relaxing. I like keeping track of what I see, and I like being able to help out to science.
Well, we're at the end of our chat today, Doc. I've had so much fun. I've laughed and smiled this entire interview, and I've learned so much about brown dwarfs. So just thank you for agreeing to be a guest on the Science Podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time, and it's always fun to connect to people that play video games and like science and art.
And where can people connect with you on social media? Can they follow your accounts? What are some of your accounts that you would like people to know about?
I post on TikTok and Instagram and Twitter, and it's all the same handle at Stellar Arts, but it's Stellar with an E, like the Stellar's J, the bird.
Well, again, thank you so much for being a guest today. This was so fun.
Awesome. Thanks.
That's the end of another Science Podcast episode. Adam is gone this week. He's playing in the Calgary Stampede with the Royals. So we are missing him, and we're missing him for the family section. He'll be back next week. Special thanks to our guest this week, Dr. Laci Brock, who talked to us about space, brown dwarfs, video games, and art. We'd also like to give a special shout out to our top tier patrons on Patreon, the Paw Pack. Without their support, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. Take it away, Chris.
Anne Schlarm, Sharon Dotson, Peggy McKeel, Chris Kelly, Samantha Dodd, Debbie Anderson, Courtney Proven, Renee Hardy, Mary Ryder, Shelby Leggett, Mary Coos, Marianne McNally, Karen Beth St. George, Bianca Hyde, Julie Smith, Andrew Lynn, Elizabeth Parmenter, Sandy Breimer, Tracy Halberg, Jenny Giger, Leela Perriello, Lisa Swartz, Catherine Jordan, Donna Craig, Jody Ogren, Liz Button, Kathy Zerker, and Ben Rathert.
For science, empathy, and cuteness.